Hermeticism isn't a belief system, it's a technology for altering consciousness. If your mind doesn't change, you've learned nothing from Hermes.
Imagination is not escapism. It is a cognitive organ as rigorous as the microscope. To discard it is to amputate half of Western reason.
Investigating secret orders isn't endorsing magic. It's exposing how invisible elites have rewired modernity from behind the curtain.
Magic is engineering with spirits. Follow the manual and it works. And if it fails, the operator, not the spirit, is the problem.
Western civilization is in a trance. Hermes' task is to deliver an ontological shock to wake us. Otherwise, we perish asleep.
Alexandria burned in 391 AD. Scholars scattered like startled birds, clutching scrolls against their chests as flames devoured humanity's greatest library. The smoke that rose over the Mediterranean carried with it mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The world mourned this catastrophic loss of knowledge. Yet something peculiar emerges when you examine the historical record closely. Certain manuscripts had vanished long before the fire started, not randomly, selectively. Someone had quietly extracted specific texts years earlier, leaving behind the safer material. The treatises on geometry stayed, the medical compendiums remained, the philosophical dialogues gathered dust on their shelves. But what about the texts that describe direct access to universal consciousness? Gone. These weren't flowery spiritual meditations. The surviving fragments suggest something far more practical. This isn't about finding a single lost book. It's about something far more extraordinary. Operational instructions are scattered across time itself. Technical procedures for what Hermetic philosophers called downloading knowledge from the cosmic mind. Consciousness as technology rather than mystery. Your smartphone doesn't generate the internet. It connects to networks that already exist. Information flows to your device through invisible channels. You become a receiver in a vast communication system. Ancient Hermetic texts describe human consciousness operating on identical principles. The tradition claimed that all knowledge already exists within what they termed the universal mind. Accessing this information required specific mental states, particular practices, and precise internal adjustments, like tuning a radio to the right frequency. They developed methods, documented procedures, created training protocols. Then those instructions disappeared. Not through accident or neglect, through deliberate fragmentation. Consider this possibility. Our modern struggle to access intuitive knowledge isn't a natural limitation. It's engineered scarcity. Someone systematically broke apart the operational manual. They embedded fragments within poetry and allegory. They ensured the technical aspects would become nearly impossible to reconstruct. The evidence supports this theory. Quantum physicists now discuss non-local information transfer. Neuroscientists have discovered that consciousness behaves more like an antenna than a computer. Ancient Hermetic principles begin resonating with cutting-edge scientific discoveries. The knowledge didn't disappear, it went underground. Consider atomic energy. Scientists understood the theory decades before building functional reactors. But imagine if someone had scattered nuclear physics across different continents, hidden critical formulas inside folktales, disguised technical specifications as religious poetry. Reconstruction would require centuries of careful detective work. This scenario precisely describes what happened to consciousness technology. The Hermetic tradition speaks of correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm. Modern physics explores holographic universe theories. Same pattern, different vocabulary. Ancient texts mention mental attunement to cosmic awareness. Quantum mechanics describes entanglement and non-local correlations. Identical phenomena, updated terminology. David Bohm's implicate order theory provides scientific language for understanding what Hermetic philosophers practiced experientially. Stuart Hameroff's research into quantum processes in consciousness validates ancient claims about the mind's true capabilities. The implications stagger the imagination. Universal information surrounds us constantly. Learning becomes less about acquiring external knowledge and more about remembering how to receive what's always been present. What we call the lost Hermetic Manuscript never existed as a single text. It was always distributed fragments, a premeditated preservation strategy that scattered operational knowledge across multiple sources, hidden within surviving traditions, encoded in the language of consciousness itself. Clement of Alexandria confessed to deliberately concealing operational Hermetic texts. His contemporary writings reference methods that cannot be written directly and practices preserved through separation. The fragmentation wasn't an accidental loss, but an intentional preservation strategy. Other wisdom traditions employed similar approaches. Alchemical formulas are embedded within symbolic imagery. Kabbalistic techniques are distributed across multiple texts. Tantric practices were transmitted through oral tradition alongside written fragments. The pattern repeats across cultures and centuries. Modern compartmentalized security follows identical principles. Critical knowledge gets distributed among multiple parties. No single source contains complete information. Reconstruction requires bringing together scattered pieces. Archaeological and textual evidence support the theory of deliberate fragmentation. We stand at a unique historical moment. Scientific understanding finally provides vocabulary for describing what ancient practitioners knew through direct experience. Quantum physics validates Hermetic principles. Neuroscience confirms consciousness operates through mechanisms our ancestors understood intuitively. The manuscript isn't lost, it's distributed among us all. Every intuitive flash, every moment of inexplicable knowing, every instance when understanding arrives without an obvious source. These are fragments of the ancient text, writing themselves across our awareness. We just need to learn how to read again. The Corpus Hermeticum sits in libraries worldwide. Scholars translate its passages. Students memorize its principles. As above, so below becomes a philosophical decoration on meditation room walls. Yet something fundamental is missing. These preserved texts read like instruction manuals with the crucial pages torn out. They describe the destination without mapping the route. They promise transformation while withholding the transformer. Two distinct categories of Hermetic knowledge emerge when you examine the surviving evidence carefully: theoretical knowledge and operational knowledge, philosophy versus technology, the difference between knowing about flight and knowing how to build wings. The theoretical material survived: correspondence principles, unity concepts, consciousness cosmology, beautiful, inspiring, ultimately frustrating abstractions that gesture toward profound possibilities without delivering practical access. The operational material disappeared. This wasn't a random historical accident. The pattern reveals deliberate selection. Consider how modern classified technology gets distributed. The theoretical physics papers get published. The engineering specifications remain restricted. You can read about quantum computing principles in academic journals. The actual construction protocols stay locked in secure facilities. Ancient Hermetic preservation followed identical logic. Clement of Alexandria spelled this out explicitly in his surviving correspondence. He wrote about hiding practical methods while preserving philosophical frameworks. His letters reference Hermetic texts that demonstrate the operations as distinct from those that describe the principles. The distinction appears throughout fragmentary evidence. The Emerald Tablet mentions operations of the sun without detailing the procedures. The Divine Pomander discusses mental transformation while omitting the transformation techniques. Even Iamblichus, when describing spiritual practices, carefully separates theoretical understanding from operational implementation. They preserved the map, they removed the vehicle. Modern science now provides vocabulary for understanding why this separation mattered. Information exists as a fundamental property of reality, according to quantum field theory. Consciousness operates through quantum processes in microtubule structures, according to current neuroscience research. Non-local correlations appear throughout quantum mechanical systems. The Hermetic concept of tuning the mind to universal mind translates directly into scientific language about consciousness interfacing with quantum information fields. Ancient practitioners apparently developed specific techniques for achieving this interface: mental positioning protocols, attention-focusing methods, consciousness calibration procedures. The lost manuscript represents not a single missing text, but an entire missing category: practical consciousness technology, the how-to manual for what David Bohm calls participatory consciousness in universal information systems. Modern parallels illuminate the magnitude of this loss. Imagine if all computer programming textbooks survived, but every actual code example disappeared. You'd understand computational theory without being able to write functional software. You'd grasp the principles while lacking implementation knowledge. This describes our relationship with Hermetic consciousness technology. The fragments that survived contain tantalizing hints, references to preparations of the vessel, mentions of proper timing and positioning, descriptions of receptive states and active reception modes. But the detailed instructions vanished. Contemporary download metaphors capture the ancient understanding more accurately than mystical language: consciousness as receiver rather than generator, mind as an antenna rather than a computer, awareness as an interface rather than an isolated system. The Hermetic tradition claimed that all information already exists within cosmic consciousness. Accessing this information required learning specific reception protocols, like configuring network settings to connect with existing data streams. They developed these protocols, tested them, refined them through generations of practice. Then, someone systematically removed them from the historical record. The question becomes, can we reconstruct the missing operational knowledge by combining surviving fragments with modern consciousness research? The answer may determine whether human beings rediscover their full cognitive potential or remain trapped within artificially limited awareness. Clement of Alexandria faced an impossible choice in 215 AD. Christianity was consolidating power across the Roman Empire. The new faith demanded theological purity, clear boundaries, definitive separation from pagan wisdom traditions. Yet Clement had spent decades studying Hermetic texts that demonstrated consciousness technologies beyond anything Christian doctrine could explain. His personal library contained operational manuals, step-by-step procedures for achieving what Hermetic practitioners called direct knowing. Techniques that produced verifiable results, methods that worked. The political pressure was becoming unbearable. Bishop Demetrius had already expelled Origen for teaching Hermetic principles alongside Christian theology. The ecclesiastical authorities were systematically purging scholars who integrated pagan wisdom with Christian faith. Clement's position at the catechetical school hung by increasingly thin threads. Writing to his student Theodotus, Clement confessed that he possessed texts which demonstrate the operations of cosmic consciousness, containing methods which cannot be written in common books. The language is precise, technical, unambiguous. Clement wasn't describing philosophical concepts. He was referencing practical procedures that required specific preparation and careful instruction, consciousness technology that demanded systematic training. His solution was ingenious. Rather than destroying the operational texts, Clement scattered their contents across multiple hiding places. He embedded fragments within philosophical treatises that would survive ecclesiastical scrutiny. He distributed key passages among trusted students who promised to preserve them separately. He created a dispersal system that would keep the knowledge alive while making it nearly impossible to reconstruct without considerable effort. The historical evidence supports this dispersal strategy. Clement's surviving writings contain dozens of references to Hermetic practices that he never fully explains. He mentions exercises of reception without detailing the exercises. He discusses proper positioning of attention without specifying the positioning techniques. He alludes to timing correlations with cosmic patterns without revealing the correlation methods. Each reference functions like a breadcrumb trail leading toward missing information. Other contemporary sources confirm this pattern. Origen's commentaries reference Hermetic practical applications that he learned from Clement but refuses to detail in writing. Hippolytus mentions techniques preserved through separation in his accounts of Alexandrian teaching methods. The fragmentation was systematic and intentional. Archaeological evidence from the Oxyrhynchus papyri discoveries supports this dispersal theory. Fragments of Hermetic operational texts have emerged from different Egyptian sites, containing complementary rather than duplicate information. Each fragment provides pieces of larger procedural sequences without containing complete instructions. Like finding scattered pages from a technical manual. The political context explains why this dispersal became necessary. Constantine's conversion in 312 AD would soon make Christianity the official imperial religion. Hermetic schools faced systematic persecution. Practitioners who refused conversion faced imprisonment or execution. Clement foresaw this persecution decades before it materialized. His dispersal strategy preserved operational knowledge while protecting practitioners from immediate political consequences. Students could maintain fragments of the larger system without possessing enough evidence to face charges of practicing forbidden arts. The approach proved remarkably effective. Hermetic consciousness techniques survived the Christian persecution by going underground. Elements appeared within contemplative Christian practices. Fragments emerged in Islamic mystical traditions. Pieces surfaced in medieval alchemical texts. The knowledge remained alive while becoming nearly unrecognizable. Clement's private writings reveal his awareness of this transformation process. In a letter to his former student Pantinus, he wrote, "The operations cannot be destroyed because they rest upon natural law, but they can be clothed in different languages and embedded within acceptable frameworks. The wise student learns to recognize the essence beneath changing appearances." This statement proves Clement understood that consciousness technologies were universal principles rather than culturally specific practices. They could be translated across religious and philosophical systems without losing their essential functionality. His dispersal strategy anticipated that future generations would develop new vocabularies for describing the same underlying operations. Modern neuroscience provides exactly such vocabulary. Quantum consciousness research offers precisely the conceptual frameworks Clement predicted would emerge. Contemporary studies of meditation and contemplative practices reveal the scientific mechanisms behind what Hermetic texts described as cosmic consciousness access. Clement's scattered fragments are finally ready for reconstruction. But the implications extend far beyond historical recovery. His dispersal strategy suggests that consciousness technologies have been continuously transmitted across cultures and centuries through disguised preservation, hidden in plain sight, embedded within traditions that survived because they adapted to changing circumstances. The lost manuscript exists not as a missing historical artifact, but as a living transmission, scattered across multiple lineages, preserved within practices that retain the operational knowledge while translating its expression. We've been carrying the fragments all along. David Bohm discovered something extraordinary while working with quantum mechanics at Princeton in 1951. The mathematics revealed a radical conclusion. Reality existed as interconnected wholeness, where information flowed instantaneously between all parts. Bohm called this the implicate order. His revolutionary insight emerged from wrestling with quantum entanglement paradoxes. When particles become entangled, measuring one instantly affects its partner, regardless of distance. Einstein famously called this spooky action at a distance because it violated everything classical physics assumed about space and time. But Bohm realized the spookiness disappeared once you recognized that space and time themselves were secondary phenomena. The fundamental layer of reality existed in what he termed enfolded form. Every region of space contained information about the whole universe. Each moment embedded all possible moments. Separation was an illusion created by our limited perception of a deeper underlying unity. In Wholeness and the Implicate Order, Bohm wrote, "In the implicate order, everything is connected to everything, and each part contains information about the whole." This wasn't philosophical speculation. This was rigorous mathematical physics, pointing toward conclusions that ancient Hermetic texts had stated for millennia. The Hermetic principle, as above, so below, suddenly acquired scientific precision. Hermetic philosophy taught that every level of reality reflected every other level. Microcosm mirrored macrocosm. Individual consciousness participated in cosmic consciousness. Knowledge existing at a universal scale could be accessed through properly attuned individual awareness. Bohm's physics provided the mechanism. If information truly exists in enfolded form throughout reality, then consciousness might function as an unfolding process, a way of making implicit information explicit, a method for translating universal patterns into individual awareness. The implication staggered conventional neuroscience. Traditional brain research assumed consciousness emerged from neural activity. Neurons fired in patterns that somehow generated subjective experience. The brain created consciousness through biochemical processes. Bohm suggested the opposite direction of causation. Consciousness might access information from the implicate order and then organize neural activity to express that information. The brain functions as a receiver and translator rather than a generator and creator. This perspective transforms how we understand learning, insight, and creative discovery. Instead of building knowledge through the accumulation of external information, consciousness would access pre-existing patterns within the implicate order. learning becomes recognition rather than acquisition. Understanding emerges through attunement rather than construction. Bohm described this process in technical terms. Consciousness participates in the general process of the universe, which is one of constant creativity and emergence of new orders. Hermetic texts use different language for identical operations. The universal mind, or cosmic consciousness, described in Hermetic literature maps directly onto Bohm's implicate order. Both represent information-rich wholeness underlying apparent separateness. Both suggest that individual consciousness can access this deeper level through specific procedures. The procedures become the crucial missing element. Bohm recognized that accessing implicate order information required what he called proprioception of thought, developing sensitivity to the subtle movements of consciousness itself, learning to distinguish between constructed thinking and received insight. Hermetic texts referenced exactly these distinctions. They described active reception versus passive construction. They emphasized developing cosmic proprioception through practices that modern neuroscience would recognize as metacognitive training. They provided detailed instructions for achieving what Bohm termed participatory consciousness. The convergence extends beyond general principles into specific operational details. Bohm noted that accessing implicate order information required achieving states of suspended judgment, where normal analytical thinking was temporarily quieted. He described these as moments when the mind becomes like a mirror, reflecting rather than distorting the deeper patterns. Hermetic practitioners used nearly identical language. They wrote about achieving mirror states of consciousness through specific mental positioning. They described the suspension of ordinary discursive thinking to allow deeper patterns to emerge. They provided training protocols for developing what they called receptive attention. Modern physics was rediscovering ancient consciousness technology. But Bohm went further than simply validating Hermetic intuitions. His mathematical framework suggested why these techniques might work at the most fundamental level of reality. If consciousness truly participates in implicate order processes, then properly configured awareness could access any information pattern existing within universal wholeness. The limitations would be technological rather than theoretical, questions of method rather than possibility. Bohm spent his later years exploring these practical implications. He developed dialogue processes designed to access collective intelligence. He investigated meditation techniques that might facilitate an implicate order connection. He collaborated with contemplative practitioners who preserved ancient methods for achieving expanded awareness states. His notebooks from this period contain fascinating speculation about consciousness technologies that might amplify natural human capacities for accessing universal information. He envisioned training programs that would teach people to recognize and utilize their inherent connection to cosmic intelligence. These notebooks read like scientific validation of everything Hermetic texts had promised. The theoretical foundation was finally in place. Rigorous physics supported claims about universal information access. Mathematical frameworks explained mechanisms that ancient practitioners had discovered through direct experience. The missing element remained the practical implementation. How exactly does individual consciousness attune to implicate order information? Which specific techniques translate theoretical possibility into operational capability? What training protocols develop the necessary sensitivity and skill? The answers lay scattered across the fragments Clement had preserved through dispersal, waiting for reconstruction. Stuart Hameroff was studying anesthesia when he stumbled upon consciousness itself. As an anesthesiologist at the University of Arizona, Hameroff noticed something peculiar about how anesthetic gases affected awareness. The drugs didn't simply suppress neural activity. They disrupted something far more subtle occurring within individual neurons. His microscopic investigations revealed the source. Deep inside each neuron, tiny protein structures called microtubules were behaving like quantum computers. These cylindrical networks, each measuring only 25 nanometers in diameter, were maintaining quantum coherence at body temperature. They were processing information through quantum mechanical operations that classical neuroscience deemed impossible. Hameroff realized he was looking at biological quantum technology. Traditional neuroscience treated neurons like simple on-off switches. Electrical impulses either fired or didn't fire. Consciousness emerged from patterns of neural network activity through mechanisms nobody could actually explain. But microtubules revealed a completely different level of information processing. Each microtubule contained thousands of tubulin proteins arranged in precise geometric patterns. These proteins could exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously through superposition. They maintained entanglement connections across the cellular structure. They processed information through quantum interference patterns. The implications revolutionized consciousness research. If microtubules truly operated as biological quantum computers, then human consciousness could access the same non-local information that quantum physicists studied in laboratory experiments. The brain wasn't isolated from quantum field effects. It was designed to interface with them. Hameroff's collaboration with mathematician Roger Penrose produced the orchestrated objective reduction theory. Consciousness emerged when quantum computations in microtubules reached critical thresholds and collapsed into classical states. Each moment of awareness represented a quantum measurement event occurring throughout the brain's cellular architecture. Ancient Hermetic texts had described identical mechanisms using different vocabulary. They wrote about consciousness as cosmic resonance occurring through proper attunement of the vessel. They described awareness as moments when universal patterns collapse into individual recognition. They provided training for achieving quantum coherence of attention. The parallels were unmistakable. Hameroff's research suggested that Hermetic practitioners had empirically discovered quantum consciousness technologies through direct experimentation. They learned to optimize microtubule quantum coherence through specific mental practices. They developed protocols for achieving sustained entanglement with universal information fields. The missing operational knowledge suddenly acquired a scientific context. Giulio Tononi approached consciousness from an entirely different direction and reached complementary conclusions. Working at the University of Wisconsin, Tononi developed integrated information theory to explain why certain physical systems generate conscious experience while others remain unconscious. His mathematical framework revealed that consciousness emerged when information became sufficiently integrated across a system's components. The key insight involved integrating information rather than processing it. Simple systems could process vast amounts of information without generating consciousness, but when information became truly integrated, when each part contained information about the whole, while the whole contained irreducible information about itself, conscious experience emerged. Tononi's equations provided precise measurements for this integration. Systems with high phi values generated rich conscious experiences. Systems with low phi values remained unconscious despite complex information processing. Consciousness wasn't about computational power, it was about informational unity. The theory explained everything from split-brain patient experiences to meditation states to psychedelic consciousness expansion. But Tononi's most startling discovery concerned information itself. Highly integrated systems didn't just process information. They accessed information that seemed to exist independently of their physical structure. As integration increased, systems became sensitive to patterns that transcended their immediate environment. This matched Hermetic descriptions of expanded awareness accessing cosmic intelligence. Tononi's mathematical framework suggested that sufficiently integrated consciousness could interface with what he called intrinsic information, patterns existing at fundamental levels of reality rather than local environmental conditions. The convergence with Bohm's implicate order was precise. Intrinsic information is mapped onto implicate order patterns. High phi consciousness corresponded to participatory awareness. Information integration mechanisms provided the bridge between individual minds and universal intelligence. Critics like Dennett and Koch challenge quantum consciousness theories, arguing that the brain's environment should destroy quantum coherence and that correlation doesn't prove causation. These objections raise legitimate methodological concerns. Yet even materialist critics acknowledge gaps in classical explanations. Koch admits that current neuroscience cannot explain how subjective experience emerges from objective neural activity. Dennett's eliminative materialism essentially argues that consciousness doesn't exist as commonly understood. The skeptical position requires its own extraordinary claims. Dennett must explain why billions of humans consistently report subjective experiences that his theory declares illusory. Koch must account for documented cases of veridical perception during cardiac arrest when brain activity appears absent. Meanwhile, quantum consciousness research accumulates supporting evidence. Recent studies confirm quantum coherence in biological systems previously thought too warm for quantum effects. Photosynthesis, avian navigation, and enzymatic reactions all utilize quantum mechanical processes. The brain's microtubule networks maintain quantum properties longer than skeptics predicted. Contemplative research provides additional validation. Advanced meditators demonstrate brain states that match theoretical predictions for enhanced information integration. Practitioners report accessing information unavailable through normal sensory channels. Documented cases of remote viewing and intuitive knowing correlate with high phi consciousness states. Different research traditions converge on identical conclusions, despite using completely different vocabularies. Bohm's implicate order physics, Hameroff's quantum neuroscience, and Tononi's information integration theory all suggest that consciousness can access universal information through specific mechanisms. Hermetic texts describe the same capabilities using experiential rather than theoretical language. The fragments are aligning. Scientific frameworks now exist for understanding what ancient practitioners achieved through direct exploration. Modern research validates their claims while providing the precision that their methods lacked. The operational knowledge becomes increasingly accessible. Information emerges as the thread connecting all perspectives. Bohm's implicate order describes reality as pure information in enfolded form. Hameroff's microtubules process information through quantum computations. Tononi's integration theory measures consciousness by informational unity. Hermetic texts describe universal information accessible through proper mental attunement. Different vocabularies, identical foundation. Each tradition discovered information as a fundamental property of existence through different methods: physics through mathematics, neuroscience through observation, Hermeticism through experience. The implications cascade through every assumption about learning, creativity, and human potential. Traditional education treats knowledge as an external commodity, requiring acquisition through repetitive exposure. Students accumulate facts through memorization and practice. Intelligence develops through building larger repositories of stored information. But information-based reality suggests the opposite process. Knowledge already exists within universal information fields. Learning involves developing sensitivity to recognize pre-existing patterns. Intelligence emerges through enhanced capacity for accessing rather than storing information. The Hermetic concept of cosmic consciousness translates directly into scientific language about quantum information fields permeating spacetime itself. Contemporary neuroscience provides precise mechanisms for this access. Brainwave research reveals that specific frequency ranges correlate with expanded awareness states. Theta rhythms between 4 to 8 Hz appear during deep meditation, creative inspiration, and spontaneous insight. These frequencies match the resonant patterns that optimize microtubule quantum coherence. Ancient Hermetic practitioners empirically discovered these optimal frequency ranges. Their texts describe achieving receptive states through practices that modern EEG studies confirm generate sustained theta activity. They developed breathwork, visualization, and attention training that produce exactly the neural conditions Hameroff's research identifies as necessary for quantum consciousness. The hypnagogic state provides particularly clear validation. This twilight zone between waking and sleeping consistently produces theta dominance, enhanced information integration, and spontaneous access to novel insights. Inventors, artists, and scientists throughout history have utilized hypnagogic states for creative breakthroughs. Edison famously napped with steel balls in his hands, allowing them to drop and wake him at optimal moments. Dali practiced identical techniques for accessing surreal imagery. Kekulé discovered the benzene ring structure through hypnagogic visualization. Hermetic texts contain detailed instructions for inducing and maintaining hypnagogic states for cosmic reception. The convergence extends to paradoxical aspects of the process. Hermetic traditions consistently emphasize that accessing universal information requires simultaneous effort and effortlessness. Practitioners must train rigorously while learning to receive spontaneously. They develop disciplined attention while cultivating passive receptivity. This apparent contradiction dissolves when viewed through quantum consciousness theory. Microtubule quantum coherence requires precise conditions, but emerges spontaneously when those conditions are met. Like laser coherence, the process demands careful preparation, followed by allowing natural phenomena to unfold. Effort creates the conditions. Effortlessness permits the emergence. Tononi's integration theory explains why both elements remain necessary. Hi-fi consciousness states require sufficient complexity to generate rich information integration, but excessive mental activity disrupts the delicate coherence needed for accessing intrinsic information. Optimal states balance sophisticated preparation with profound receptivity. Yet productive tensions remain between mystical and scientific approaches. Hermetic language emphasizes experiential validation through direct knowing. Scientific methodology demands reproducible results through controlled experimentation. Contemplative practices value subjective transformation. Laboratory research requires objective measurement. These differences generate creative friction rather than irreconcilable conflict. Subjective exploration identifies phenomena for scientific investigation. Objective research provides mechanisms that enhance contemplative practice. Personal transformation validates theoretical predictions. Reproducible results confirm the reliability of ancient methods. The integration creates hybrid approaches that transcend both purely mystical and purely materialist limitations. Modern contemplative neuroscience represents this synthesis in action. Researchers like Richard Davidson study meditation through rigorous scientific protocols while honoring the transformative intent of contemplative traditions. Practitioners like Jon Kabat-Zinn translate ancient mindfulness techniques into evidence-based therapeutic interventions. Similar integration becomes possible for Hermetic consciousness technologies. The operational knowledge scattered by Clement's dispersal strategy can be reconstructed using scientific methodology while preserving experiential validity. Laboratory studies can verify ancient claims, while contemplative practice explores applications that transcend laboratory limitations. This synthesis suggests the emergence of what might be called expanded consciousness science, a discipline that integrates insights from quantum physics, neuroscience, and wisdom traditions without reducing any perspective to the others. An approach that honors both rigorous investigation and transformative practice. Such science would acknowledge that consciousness represents far more than biochemical brain activity. It would develop technologies that amplify rather than replace natural human capacities. It would recognize that accessing universal information requires both scientific understanding and contemplative cultivation. The practical implications stretch beyond academic interest. Education could incorporate receptive learning methods alongside analytical instruction. Healthcare could utilize consciousness-based interventions alongside pharmaceutical treatments. Technology could enhance human awareness rather than substituting artificial intelligence for natural intelligence. Most fundamentally, this integration offers renewed appreciation for human potential itself. We aren't isolated biological machines struggling to survive in indifferent environments. We're conscious beings capable of participating in universal intelligence through properly developed awareness. The lost Hermetic Manuscript becomes a metaphor for capacities we've forgotten rather than knowledge we never possessed. Different epochs developed different languages for describing identical phenomena. Ancient Hermeticism, quantum physics, and consciousness neuroscience represent successive waves of discovery rather than competing worldviews. The underlying reality remains constant. Only our vocabulary evolves. Future education could transform from content delivery to consciousness technology. Students learning receptive protocols for accessing information fields directly rather than memorizing facts through repetition. This isn't science fiction speculation, it's a logical extrapolation from current research trajectories. Universities already integrate contemplative practices into neuroscience curricula. Medical schools teach mindfulness alongside anatomy. Business programs incorporate meditation training for enhanced decision-making. The infrastructure for receptive education is emerging within existing institutions. but resistance comes from entrenched educational hierarchies. Traditional academic authority depends on information scarcity. Professors maintain status through exclusive access to specialized knowledge. Institutions justify expenses through the controlled distribution of certification. The entire system assumes that learning requires external instruction rather than internal cultivation. Democratized access to universal information threatens these power structures fundamentally. Students who can directly access mathematical principles don't need mathematics professors. Researchers who can tap cosmic intelligence don't require extensive library resources. The traditional gatekeeping functions of educational institutions have become obsolete. Similar disruption spreads through every knowledge-based profession. Legal practice changes when attorneys can access comprehensive jurisprudential patterns through consciousness interfaces. Medical diagnosis transforms when practitioners can perceive systemic health information directly through enhanced awareness. Scientific research accelerates when investigators can access experimental insights through intuitive reception rather than trial and error methodology. The implications terrify established professional hierarchies while exciting those excluded from current systems. Technology development follows predictable trajectories toward consciousness amplification. Brain-computer interfaces are evolving from crude electrode arrays toward quantum-coherent neural enhancement systems. Devices that optimize microtubule quantum states rather than supplanting natural consciousness. Technology is designed to amplify rather than replace human cognitive capacities. Silicon Valley companies already invest billions in neurotechnology development. Elon Musk's Neuralink represents primitive first steps toward direct brain-computer integration. Facebook's metaverse initiatives explore consciousness technology interface possibilities. But current approaches remain mechanistically oriented. They treat consciousness as a computational process requiring technological augmentation rather than a quantum phenomenon requiring technological facilitation. The difference determines whether future developments enhance or diminish human potential. Hermetic-informed technology development would prioritize consciousness amplification over consciousness replacement. Ethical dilemmas emerge around enhanced cognitive capabilities. Society already struggles with inequalities based on natural intelligence differences. Artificial enhancement could create extreme mental inequality. Enhanced individuals might develop into separate species incapable of meaningful communication with unenhanced populations. Yet, restricting access to consciousness technologies perpetuates existing inequalities while preventing beneficial applications. Enhanced doctors could diagnose diseases undetectable through current methods. Enhanced teachers could facilitate learning breakthroughs for students with cognitive disabilities. Enhanced researchers could solve climate change and energy challenges that remain intractable through conventional approaches. The Hermetic principle of universal information access suggests democratic rather than aristocratic applications. Ancient texts describe consciousness technologies as a natural human birthright rather than an elite privilege. Every individual possesses an inherent capacity for a cosmic intelligence connection. Training and technique development democratize access rather than restricting it to genetic or economic elites. But implementation requires unprecedented cultural maturation. Enhanced cognitive capabilities demand corresponding development in wisdom, compassion, and ethical responsibility. The capacity for accessing universal information must be balanced by a commitment to universal benefit. Ancient Hermetic schools maintained rigorous ethical training alongside technical instruction. Students learned moral philosophy before receiving operational techniques. Character development preceded consciousness enhancement. Modern applications require similar integration. Contemplative neuroscience programs already incorporate ethical reflection alongside technical training. Research institutions develop guidelines for responsible consciousness research. Professional organizations establish standards for enhanced cognitive capabilities. The trajectory toward expanded human consciousness appears inevitable given current scientific discoveries and technological capabilities. The question becomes whether this expansion serves individual aggrandizement or collective flourishing. Hermetic wisdom traditions consistently emphasized that cosmic consciousness access carries corresponding responsibility for cosmic benefit. Enhanced awareness naturally generates enhanced compassion when properly cultivated. The reconstruction of the lost manuscript might provide exactly the ethical framework necessary for navigating consciousness technology responsibly. Ancient practitioners understood that individual consciousness enhancement and collective well-being were inextricably linked. Their dispersed wisdom could guide contemporary applications toward beneficial rather than destructive outcomes. We stand at the threshold of recovering our full human potential. The choices we make now determine whether that recovery serves wisdom or folly. The ancient transmission never stopped. Every flash of recognition that feels more like remembering than discovering, these are fragments of the lost manuscript writing themselves across your awareness. We've traced the evidence across centuries and disciplines. Clement's deliberate dispersal strategy, Bohm's implicate order revelations, Hameroff's quantum consciousness discoveries, Tononi's information integration mathematics. Each thread leads to identical conclusions through completely different pathways. Consciousness operates as a cosmic antenna rather than an isolated computer. The metaphor captures everything our investigation has revealed. Radio antennas don't create the electromagnetic signals they receive. They simply provide proper configuration for detecting transmissions that already exist throughout space. Adjust the tuning, improve the reception clarity, and expand the frequency range. Human consciousness works identically. The Hermetic universal mind broadcasts continuously through quantum information fields. Individual awareness can learn to receive these transmissions through specific attunement practices. The ancient texts provided technical manuals for optimizing reception quality, but here's the revelation that changes everything. You don't need to reconstruct Clement's scattered fragments to begin receiving. The capacity exists within your current awareness. Every intuitive flash proves the antenna still functions. You're already accessing universal information through spontaneous quantum coherence events in your brain's microtubule networks. The difference lies in recognition rather than acquisition. Most people dismiss their intuitive insights as imagination or coincidence. They trust only information acquired through laborious analytical processes. They ignore the subtle signals that arrive through direct reception. Ancient practitioners learned to distinguish between constructed thoughts and received insights. They developed sensitivity to recognize when understanding emerged from cosmic intelligence rather than personal reasoning. They trusted the antenna's natural function. This recognition transforms the fundamental question about human learning. Instead of asking, "How do I gain knowledge?" the inquiry becomes, "How do I recognize knowledge that's already accessible?" Instead of building up information through accumulation, consciousness learns to tune into patterns that exist within universal wholeness. The implications ripple through every aspect of human experience. Artists describe inspiration as receiving rather than creating. Scientists report breakthroughs arriving as sudden recognition rather than gradual deduction. Inventors claim their innovations come through downloading rather than constructing. They're accurately describing quantum consciousness, accessing implicate order information. Yet most educational systems still operate on accumulation models. Students memorize facts instead of developing receptive sensitivity. Teachers deliver content instead of facilitating attunement. Learning becomes mechanical repetition rather than organic recognition. The scattered manuscript offers blueprints for educational transformation. Hermetic consciousness technologies can be reconstructed and validated through contemporary neuroscience. Ancient practices can be refined using modern understanding of brain states and quantum processes. The operational knowledge can be recovered while honoring both contemplative wisdom and scientific rigor. But recovery requires individual participation rather than institutional permission. You can begin exploring receptive awareness immediately. Notice those moments when insights arrive without an obvious source. Pay attention to the subtle difference between thinking about problems and receiving solutions. Experiment with the hypnagogic states where theta rhythms optimize quantum coherence naturally. The antenna already exists within your skull's microtubule networks. The cosmic transmission never stops broadcasting. The reception quality improves through practice rather than theory. Every contemplative tradition preserved fragments of the operational techniques: meditation, prayer, visualization, and breathwork. Different approaches toward identical outcomes. Methods for achieving the quantum coherence states that facilitate information access. Ancient wisdom and modern science converge on practical possibilities. Consider this possibility. The lost Hermetic Manuscript isn't lost at all. It's distributed across every conscious being on the planet. Each person carries fragments of cosmic intelligence that become accessible through proper attunement. Clement's dispersal strategy succeeded beyond his wildest imagination. The operational knowledge survived not just in hidden texts, but in consciousness itself. We are the manuscript. The question that remains is simple. Will you learn to read what's already written in your awareness? Will you develop the sensitivity to recognize cosmic intelligence when it broadcasts through your natural receptive capacity? The transmission continues. The antenna awaits your attention. All you need to do is remember how to listen. But remembering requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands practical engagement with the consciousness technologies we've explored. Every transformation begins with recognizing your role as co-creator in this cosmic information exchange, and the most direct path to that recognition flows through dedicated meditation practice. We've developed a collection of audio tools specifically designed to help you access these elevated states of consciousness. These guided experiences integrate the Hermetic principles and neuroscience insights we've discussed, providing practical methods for optimizing your natural receptive capacity. To learn more and gain immediate access to these consciousness enhancement tools, click the link on your screen or in the comments below. If this exploration of the lost Hermetic Manuscript resonated with your own experience of cosmic intelligence, write in the comments, "This made sense to me,"